Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the Extra Mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now, your host, Jackson Mummy, owner of the Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 257 of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is your host, Jackson Mummy. Glad to have you with us today. We're here, as always, to talk about how to make the next bar exam your last bar exam and to show you an effective and affordable step-by-step program that will help you pass the bar exam. So we're really glad you're with us today. Thanks for being here. If this is your first time on the podcast, again, welcome. We're really glad to have you join us. Come to you every week about this same time in both video and audio format. So if you'd like to watch this video, you can do that by going to celebrationbarreview.com/257. That's the episode number. Or you can listen to the podcast on Apple iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, radio.com, and a lot of other places. So lots of different ways to get your podcast fix as it comes to the bar exam. Well, as this episode is coming to you, we're now around 40 days, a little under 40 days until the July 2019 bar exam. And I know that people that are preparing for that exam are really locked in and working diligently and making, I hope, great progress towards their studies. I actually thought in today's episode, I'd focus a bit more on those of you thinking now about the 2020 exams. And the subject today is a difficult one, frankly. A few years ago, I recorded a video on YouTube called The 5 Groups Who Will Never Pass the Bar Exam. I think I had just finished reading Mitch Albom's The 5 People You Meet in Heaven, and I thought, well, what the heck? And it was controversial, to say the least. It got tons and tons of response and comments, a lot of comments about my hair, interestingly enough, and I promise you it is all my own real hair. But I guess what happened is that I really struck a chord, and a lot of people were very angry at what I had said. It wasn't because it wasn't true, it was just too true, I suppose. And so there was a lot of blowback and a lot of people that said, well, why in the world would you talk about who can't pass the exam? They really missed the point of that video, which was to talk about how you get out of those groups so that you can pass the bar exam. Well, as I was going back through the archives this week, I came across that video and I saw all the comments again, and I was like, oh man, do I really want to go down this road? And I don't know, for some crazy reason, I figured, well, let me re-record that video and see if I can update it a little bit and talk about whether or not it's still true. Are there still 5 groups that won't pass the exam? And my conclusion today is even more so that there are some categories and circumstances in which some people are not going to pass the exam unless they get out of that group or that condition or that mindset. And I think it's more true today because the pass rates are even lower today than they were several years ago when I first recorded that video. So in today's episode, I'm going to share with you that new video that we've just released about the 5 groups that will never pass the bar exam. Now, I want to be clear. I am not in any way trying to degrade or depress or anger or upset anyone. My goal here is simply to point out some truths about the test. And if you happen to fit into one of these groups, then I think you have to decide, how can I get out of it? What can I do differently? And that's really the purpose of this message. Now, when it comes to talking about what to do differently, before we jump into the meat of today, I want to remind you that this podcast, as always, is sponsored by our free webinar. It's this Thursday at 7 p.m. and it's titled, Do Something Different, Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. This is a look at the 4 steps that successful bar takers follow. It's in their own words. It's got lots of testimonials and case studies, but lots of content about what you have to do to be successful on the bar exam. It's completely free, but you do need to register in advance. And you can do that by going to the show notes here on the video or audio page, or by going to celebrationbarreview.com/webinar. Again, it's Thursday night at 7 p.m. Really encourage you to attend and watch and participate. I think you'll find it's incredibly valuable and helpful as you start thinking about your exams in 2020 or beyond. All right, well, I don't think I should wait any longer. I'm going to live dangerously here and re-record this message, put it out there for you. I hope you'll take it in the spirit in which I've offered it, which is simply to say that if you find yourself being described in one of these groups, it doesn't mean that I think you will never ever pass the bar exam. It's just you're going to have to make some changes in order to pass. And so I want to be able to give you that guidance and opportunity, and I hope that you'll appreciate that. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into our message of the 5 groups of people that will never pass the bar. Fairly provocative title to talk with you about today. It's called the 5 groups of people who are never going to pass the bar exam and how you can avoid being in those groups. Now, this is the group of people who go to take the bar exam and they're just never going to pass. And over and over and over again, they're going to try and try and try, and they're going to continue to fail. And I hate that for anybody. And so while it sounds like a really harsh topic to talk about, in reality, I want you to stay out of these 5 groups. So I'm going to discuss today 5 different groups of people that, in my experience, typically fail the bar over and over and over again. But more importantly, I'm also going to tell you how you can get out of those groups if you happen to be in one of them. So if I describe a group today and you're part of that group and you don't want to be there, I don't want you to get flustered. I don't want you to go, oh man, he's just so negative. And I don't want to hear any of that. I got it. I just want you to think about what I'm telling you and whether or not it's necessary for you to do something differently to get yourself out of that group. Fair enough? All right. Well, let's jump in and talk about these 5 groups and how you can stay out of them. Now, here's group number 1 of people who will never pass the bar exam. This is not going to make me very popular or make me any friends. This first group are people who do not write, speak, or read English with proficiency. They're simply not going to pass. Now, I recognize that there are many of you who are foreign trained attorneys who are taking the bar exam, and you're learning English, you're trying your hardest to get really proficient and good at English, but here's the reality. If you can't write and read and understand and speak English, you are never going to pass the American bar exam. The places where you can take it are, as you know, fairly limited right now. You can take the UBE in New York, you can take California, Texas, Georgia, Florida exam if you're from Puerto Rico. And in all of those jurisdictions and others, when I've worked with people who literally cannot speak English with proficiency, who struggle horribly with their English reading and writing and grammar, it doesn't matter how hard they're working. It doesn't matter how many hours that they're putting in. It doesn't really matter how intelligent they are. They will never pass the US bar exam. And frankly, if you've got any doubt about that, all you really need to do is to watch the politics in this country right now, and you can see the extraordinary amount of xenophobia that we've got. I think that's symptomatic. There's no mercy given by the bar examiners in any jurisdiction for poor grammar, for language problems, for an inability to understand cultural norms. Is that right? Should it be that way? Well, that's not really for me to say. I'd like to see us be a lot more tolerant in the bar, but the reality is that the examiners are not tolerant, and they certainly are not looking to help applicants of any kind. And so, for example, if you're writing your bar essays and you can't keep the subject and verb tenses together, if you're using past tense and future tense in the same sentence, for example, or if you can't keep singular and plural nouns distinct and separate, if your grammar indicates that you clearly don't know the way to use phrasing and participles, if you've got difficulty with language, just picking the right words, knowing what they are, then those things will destroy your ability to take the bar exam and to be successful. And I don't care how hard you work, you simply won't get through the test with a successful result. And sometimes I think there are people that think to themselves, well, they should let me take the bar exam in my native language. And I can appreciate that. That would be a great thing, except you can't. And so as a result, you have to work in English regardless of how good you are in it. So if you cannot speak, read, or write English, basically, forget it. Don't take the bar exam until you get more proficient. So what should you do to get out of that group of non-English speakers? Well, there are a couple of very practical things you can do. One is to enroll in a college-level English course. Now, in my experience, it's not enough to just read some books or listen to people or try to pick it up casually. It's not going to work for the level that you need here. You need to go and take, I think, at least a college level English reading and writing course. And an English for speakers of other languages course typically isn't sophisticated enough for the kind of work that you have to do on the bar exam. So I would avoid that. Although if you really need that as a basic primer, go ahead. I think you've got to take the time. And what that means is it might be a semester, it might be a year that you have to delay your bar, but you need to do that rather than going through the trauma of taking the exam. The second thing think you've got to do is you need to put yourself into what I describe as the English-only bubble. What I mean by this is you need to speak English, you need to read English, you need to write English, you need to think in English. In fact, you probably need to dream in English. And if you're in a position, as many people are, where you live currently in an ethnic community in the United States and you don't have to speak English, even if you're in that community in the US, or if you live abroad and you're coming to the US to take the bar and you're not speaking English every day, you're in deep trouble until you get yourself into the English-only bubble and start learning how to work, think, read, write, comprehend, and analyze in English. Now, there are some great books available on reading and speaking and writing English for lawyers. One of my favorites, and I think the best, is called Culture to Culture by Professor Jill Ramsfield. Jill is a friend of mine and my mentor, and she's done a terrific book for foreign attorneys. There's also the book, The Elements of Style by Strunk and White. It's a great classic primer on English writing, and those are two good books. So you need to look at those things. But look, if you're not able to speak English comfortably, if you can't read English, or if you can't write English, then do the right thing. Sit out of the bar exam for a while and wait and become more proficient in those skills. Because frankly, in my experience, and right now, given everything that's going on in the bar and in the country generally, it's been my experience that you simply don't have much of a chance to pass the exam. Well, that's kind of a bleak number one item, but the truth is, with time and practice, you can get out of that group, even if you had never spoken English before. And we've got lots of people that have done that. And if you're in that group to start with, get out of it. Go ahead and get proficient. Well, the second group that we want to talk about is an opposite extreme. I mean, the foreign attorneys I've met tend to be very hard workers and very diligent. But there's another group of people who are just wildly arrogant about their skills. And I suspect most of them aren't watching this because they're so smart and they're so confident that they don't feel that they would need it. But if you happen to be watching, and you're basically the person who thinks that you can pass the bar, if you just cram for a week or two before the test and you do just a little bit of studying, you'll be okay. Now, typically this person is a very successful older attorney who remembers or kind of misremembers what the process was like. And they tend to say something like, you know, back when I took the bar, all I had to do was, check into a hotel and, spend a few nights before the test, read some books, brief some cases, drink a fifth of Jim Beam, and I showed up and I took the exam and I passed. Well, that's true. 40 years ago, I think you probably could have done that in a lot of jurisdictions. But today, it's not possible. And if that's the group that you're in, you're probably going to fail. And you'll fail most of the time, and you'll wonder what hit you because it's such a different world. And I see this all the time with attorneys who come back and go, oh my God, I can't believe the test has happened that way. And you simply can't cram for just a week or two, a night or two, or a weekend before the test. Now, along with that group of cramming for a couple of weeks of people, there are those that simply refuse to schedule their study time in a productive way. What I mean, these are the people who say, well, I'm going to study about 10 hours or 15 hours or 20 hours or whatever it is per week, but I refuse to put that into a schedule. I'm not going to be bound by any schedule. I'm not going to write it down. I'm not going to commit myself to it. I'm going to be a free spirit. I won't be accountable. I'll just study when I can. Okay, look, folks, nobody wants to study for the bar exam. I mean, nobody that I know gets up in the morning typically and says, oh boy, I get to study for the bar today. I mean, you might, but you're a little weird if you do. The reality is, if you think that you're going to be able to just casually study, to just show up and do a little bit of work, and somehow magically the moment will hit you and you'll go, oh, I guess I'll study today for 5 hours. That isn't going to happen. And this must be intentional. You must be intentional about what you're doing. And if you're not intentional about the way you study, if you're not putting in the hours and the work and scheduling them and being accountable for those hours, And we've talked about that in other places in our podcasts and videos. We talked about accountability and the need for it and measurement. But if you're not doing those things, then you will never pass the bar. I promise you, you simply cannot. For this second group, you cannot casually stroll into the bar exam or casually study for the exam and pass it. It just isn't going to happen. And all those brilliant old law partners who wander through your office and go, I don't know what the problem is with the bar because it was so easy back when I took the bar in, 70 or 80 or 60 or whenever. Really, it isn't that world anymore. And if you think you can live in that world and pass this bar exam in this era, you're just delusional. You're never going to pass. And so the way that you get out of it is that you start scheduling your day, you schedule your time, and you study for a prolonged period of time. We recommend studying for 4 to 6 months or even longer, but in any event, it's going to take about 300 hours of total study time. So take the number of days until your bar exam, divide that into 300, and that's what you've got to do on a daily basis. And then you need to commit to that and get yourself out of that group of people who are going to fail because they fail to schedule or they don't take the test seriously. Now, our third group of people who I think are going to fail are the people who are kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum from group number 2. These are the people that have 60-hour-a-week plus jobs. They're critically important work that they're doing. Maybe it's that they're running their own law firm or in charge of a firm. Maybe they're doing some work that's God's work. It's so critically important. It's absolutely vital. It's massive, and it's really, really complicated. And if they don't do that work, life on this planet will end. It could be that. Maybe it's that they're Captain America or Batman or Iron Man. I don't know. These are also the same people that also typically have 3 children that they're responsible for. They have an unsupportive spouse. They have a horrific boss. I mean, you get the idea. If you're one of those people and you're working a full-time job and you have other responsibilities in your family and you've got home responsibilities and you're not getting help at home from a spouse or a neighbor or a friend or somebody or a relative, the truth is you're going to fail the bar, and you're going to fail every single time. I know it sounds so bleak, but it's the same reason as for the group in number 2. You're simply not able to put in the time it takes to be successful in the bar, not because you don't want to, but because you're overcommitted. I have all the admiration in the world for moms, single moms in particular, who are working, supporting their families, raising their kids, and studying for the bar. It is admirable, and we've helped so many of those individuals pass the bar. But I have to tell you that if you're in that group, in order to be successful, you've got to get help. The people that we worked with who passed went and got daycare help. They got family help. They sent the kids off to summer camp if they were old enough. They cut back on their hours at work. They said no to the boss. You cannot do it all. And the idea of being a superhero and studying for the bar is something that maybe Marvel Comics would come up with, bar taker. I don't know. I'm sure there's a cape that's been made just for it. But in reality, it just doesn't happen. And so if you're trying to juggle a full-time job, a full-time family with no help, don't take the bar right now. Sit out and wait. There'll be time, but you're not going to pass trying to do it that way. You can't multitask and get in the hours that you need. And I know some of you are like, oh, such a downer. Why would he not encourage me? Well, it's because I don't think going and taking the exam and failing over and over again is an encouragement. I think it's actually a waste of time and energy and resources. Get yourself ready and take it. The exam is not susceptible right now for people who aren't able to put all of their chips on the table, who are not able to go all in. That's what the examiners are doing. And so this concept that you can do a little bit of study and a little bit of family time and a little bit of work means that ultimately you're lousy at work, you're lousy at home, you're lousy in your studies. And that's the really hard, unvarnished truth. And if that's painful to hear, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be insulting, but it doesn't have to be that way. What you have to do is to make the choice about what's most important to you. And if it's your job or your family or your spouse or your community, whatever comes ahead of the bar, then that's fine. But for some season in your life, the bar exam will have to move way up on that list in order for you to be successful, in order to have the time to study. And so when people tell you, oh, well, you can do it all, just lean into it, raise the kids, do it all, be the superstar at work. When they're taking their hour-and-a-half nap each day at home, the kids, you'll be able to study. That's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And that's our third group, and it breaks my heart because I know you're trying so hard, but really it might not be the right season. Well, group number 4 is probably going to irritate most of you that are watching, because I can bet that many of you, if not most of you, have already bought into this. And I've certainly talked about it in other places. But one of the groups of people that I think will never pass the bar are the people who try to memorize as their primary study approach. Oh, that's a hard one, isn't it? If your entire strategy for studying for the bar exam is, I'm going to memorize all the law, it won't work. Here's why. Number one, you just can't do it. I have never in my 30 years met anyone who told me my great strength is that I can memorize everything. I've never heard it. Now, in fact, what I really hear most of the time is exactly the opposite. People will tell me I'm not very good at memorization, and yet those same people go on to say, so what am I going to do? Well, I think I'm going to work on learning how to memorize. Why? It's not the skill that's tested on the bar exam. It's not rewarded on the exam at all. It doesn't have any basis in reality. Memorization is just part of a mythology that you've heard about how you pass, and it's got no real connection to what works or doesn't work on the bar or in real life. Now listen, I know some of you out there in the world, and some of you are listening and watching this, and you're going to be really angry and say to me, yeah, but that's what they taught me at, fill in the name of your big box bar review. And you're going to tell me why it's so critical that you memorize. And I would say to you, good, that's great. But by the way, have you noticed the overall pass rates for the national jurisdictions, the ones that are served by the big box? You know, currently more bar takers fail the exam each year than pass the exam. That's pretty stunning, isn't it? Most people take those big box courses, and most people try to memorize, and most people fail the bar exam, and they fail repeatedly. My point here is that memorization is not a fail-safe, successful method. And the real killer, beyond the fact that you can't possibly memorize everything, is that even if you could memorize, the examiners always have one more opportunity to test something that you failed to memorize or didn't know was coming. You know, case in point is here in Florida, the examiners a couple of exams ago picked 3 essays on their essay day for subjects that they had never tested or only rarely tested in the previous 20 years. And so people who are trying to memorize in anticipation of those subjects, well, didn't do them much good. And so we saw an enormous failure rate. You couldn't do it. And we see that across the country, fewer people passing the bar nationally each year because you simply can't memorize your way to success in preparing for the bar exam. Now, having said that, what do you do if you were a memorizer? Well, I think you've got a couple of options. You're not locked into it for sure. One of those options is to basically learn the law instead of memorize it. You need to know the law, but knowing the law comes from understanding how to use it in context. And we talk about that in a lot of places, including the free webinar that we offer, How to Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. There's lots of information in that webinar and on our website, and we'll link up to all of that as well. But the reality is that you actually can learn the law through reading, through lectures, through question practice, done over time in small bits, much like a staircase, adding more effectively. And it will be more effective than memorizing anything. Now, this actually educationally preferred method is called spaced or stepped repetition, and it's empirically more effective at all levels of education and testing, and it's the exclusive methodology that we use. And if you've been thinking about memorizing and memorizing and memorizing, if you're making flashcards and mnemonics and checklists, really what you're doing is wasting your time and your energy. And frankly, while I'm probably exaggerating a bit when I say you'll never pass if you memorize, the truth is that the odds against you are so deeply stacked against you, if that's your only strategy for studying for the bar exam, that I might as well say you'll never pass. It's just not going to work for the majority of people. And yet it remains a pervasive myth of how to study. So I just want to tell you that if your goal is to memorize and to keep doing that over and over again, we'll probably see you at the next exam because the odds are so badly stacked against you. And you've simply got to get out of that mindset. You've got to start learning instead of memorizing. And it can be done. A course like ours will do it for sure. Now, I don't care what you did in law school. Remember that the test here is not a law school test. The practice of law is never about memorization. And I think if you just stop to think about it for a minute, those of you that are in practice or work daily around lawyers, you know that they don't memorize anything. It's not part of the skill set that's required anymore. And so it's an artifact of an earlier time. And I think you want to be really careful about staying out of that group that is locked into memorization. So that's our fourth group of people who I think aren't going to pass, people that memorize. Ooh, that is going to make me unpopular. But how do you get out of it? Well, you stop memorizing and you start learning through spaced repetition. You start learning and studying in a way that's more effective and more appropriate to the test that you're actually taking. All right, that leads us then to our fifth and final group of people, the ones who are never going to pass the bar until they make a change. That's our fifth group. These are the people that keep repeating the same approach to their study over and over again, even after repeated failures. This is the classic definition of insanity, isn't it? They do the same thing over and over and over again, and then they expect a different result. Why is that? It's not going to happen. The reality is that if you tried the drill and kill, memorize, cram approach to the bar exam, and you failed, and you do it again and again and again and again, you'll fail over and over and over until you stop and change and do something radically different. Now, I'm not saying that we're the only bar review course out there that has insight into how to pass the bar exam. But over 30 years, Celebration Bar Review's done pretty well and beaten the state rates across all the states for years and years and years and years. And it's by no means exclusive to us, but I'm simply saying that whatever people are doing when they're just following the herd and doing the same old thing and getting the same bad results over and over and over, well, folks, you got to stop. You got to break out of that cycle. You got to leave the herd and go do something different in order to get a different result. Now, is that a little scary? Yeah, I think it is. And I suppose for some people it is. But is it any scarier than just going in year after year, exam after exam, knowing that you're not going to get a passing result or that you're going to get the same failing result? Your score is going to stay about the same. And I see this all the time from people. When you study the same way, when you're trying to memorize, you're trying to analyze in the multi-state bar exam, you're issue spotting and using IRAC style writing in your essays, you're trying to use attack outlines and flashcards. If you've been doing all these things and it has not been successful for you, if that's the case, then you're going to continue to fail as long as you continue to do them. For some people, those things will work, but it's a minority and they've gone on. And the reality is that if you haven't passed, you need to change what you're doing. So I encourage you to make that change, to have the courage to change, whether it's to come to us, to go somewhere else, do something else, but don't keep repeating your errors over and over again. It's one of the reasons that we encourage our students to use new tools like PhotoReading and mind maps, Paraliminal recordings, and audio meditation. It's to change the patterns of study so that with a different approach, the one that we offer based on selective intuition and a more direct writing style, it results in improved results and improvements that come dramatically. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can check out our case studies tab on our website at celebrationbarreview.com, where you'll find video interviews with many of our past successful students. You'll note that most of them had failed their exams previously using a different approach. And you'll notice that what they did is they almost all recognized the need for change, and then they made those changes, whether it was in their life or their study style, in improving their English, or in changing their approach by adding photo reading or something else. Well, those are our 5 groups that I think are never going to pass the bar exam. If you aren't proficient in English, you're probably not going to pass. If you think you can pass by just cramming for a few weeks before the test, or by refusing to schedule your studies in any coherent, consistent way, you're probably not going to pass. If you've got a full-time demanding job and family and other commitments and no help at home or at work, you're probably not going to pass. If you're putting all your eggs into the memorization basket of study, you're probably not going to pass. And if you keep using the same failed system of study that you've been using, then you're probably not going to pass. You've simply got to break out of those things. And I hope that you'll do that so that you can be successful on the exam. Now, if you'd like to know more, I'd love to talk with you. And we put a link here for a free consultation with me, so be sure to check that out. To be clear, I think there is great hope for everyone who's willing to break free of these 5 groups and break the mold. I see people passing every exam who failed over and over and over again in all of the jurisdictions that we teach. So we know that it could be done, and it can be done by you. It's simply a matter of changing your perspective and taking action now so that you can make the next bar exam your last bar exam. Okay, well, that was fun, wasn't it? Sorry, guys. I really want to be explicit that we believe that anyone can pass the bar, but you just have to do some things differently. And that's why we offer our webinar Thursday night, 7 p.m. Do something different. Make the next bar exam your last bar exam. Again, you can register by clicking on the button here on the show notes or by going to celebrationbarreview.com/webinar, registering and joining us Thursday at 7 p.m. I hope that this message has given you some things to think about. I hope it's provoked your thought process. I certainly don't want it to discourage anyone. I just want you to recognize that there are major challenges in the bar, and we stand ready to help you. And I want to invite you, if you've got any questions at all, please use the link on the show notes page to schedule your free consultation with me. I'd be glad to talk with you about your particular circumstances and to help you make the next bar exam your last bar exam. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at www.celebrationbarreview.com.